Hi, jazz valve trombonist Barry Mosley. It's a late night here, and I figure it's time for a Bob Brookmeyer story, and a Mouthpiece story that's kind of fun. Of course, Bob Brookmeyer was my inspiration to play the valve trombone. A girlfriend had brought home a record, Bob Brookmeyer and Friends, when I was in college. And I was already familiar with valve instruments, having played trumpet and baritone horn. But I instantly switched to valve trombone full time, and I do it, and I love it, and that's been my thing. But the biggest thrill, one of my biggest thrills, I've had a couple, but was I'm hearing Bob Brookmeyer live for the first time and meeting him and hanging out just a little bit. I got to know him a little bit on a few trips that he made to Los Angeles. He rarely came to Los Angeles in the last few years of his life. He did live there for a long time when he was younger, but in the last few years he lived mostly back east and a little bit of time in Europe. And so, in a way, he was going to be playing. I followed his itinerary, and I noticed he was going to be playing at the Jazz Bakery in Los Angeles. And my dear brother bought me a ticket and said, "We're going to go hear Bob Brookmeyer." It was kind of a birthday gift. And I said, "That is the most amazing gift I could have." And I remember just hearing him warming up. I was standing out in the hall. I could hear his horn doing a sound check. It was just as beautiful as I could imagine it could be, as listening to him for many years on record. So I was very excited to hear him play. And I went into, of course, to the show, and wasn't a big place, but he did an amazing show, and it was so amazing to hear his tone and his articulation live. It was just, after years of listening to records, it was quite a thing. So of course I wanted to meet him, and I went. After the gig was over, I went and said hello to him and told him I was a jazz valve trombonist, and he had inspired me. He was very cordial, very nice, invited me backstage and into a little dressing room where I met his lovely wife, and we were just talking, and he was putting his horn away, and we're just chit-chatting, and I had read, this is a Mouthpiece thing, I had read that he had played the same Mouthpiece for 50 years. I'd read that somewhere. So I was asking him about that as he was putting away his trombone in a bag. And he was standing to my right, and I said, "Yeah, Bob," I said, "I heard you've been playing the same Mouthpiece for like 50 years. And he said, "Yes." And he just handed it to me while he was putting the rest of his horn away. He handed it to, so that I could look at it. I thought, this is cool. This guy's been playing this Mouthpiece for 50 years. And he puts it in my hand, and I'm holding it up to the light, and I'm looking at it, looking through the hole of it and checking it out. It was an interesting Mouthpiece. It was a John Coffey Mouthpiece. They were very, very rare. I'll talk about that in a moment. But, and I looked at it. It was about a Bach, about a 7 rim diameter, not too deep, not too shallow either. And a fairly big throat in it, and it was a thin rim. It was a different kind of a mouthpiece, one I'd never seen before. It was made by a Boston symphonic player who made some mouthpieces, very few, called John Coffey. But the funny thing is, when I was looking at the mouthpiece, and Brookmeyer was putting his horn away, he was to my right, and I said, "Oh, so you've been playing this thing for like 50 years?" And he gave me that look. He looked to, he raised his left eyebrow and looked at me, and he said, "I tried to change," and raised his eyebrow. So I started laughing, because as a brass player, we know what that means. We like to experiment with things, and sometimes it's a very big problem. And but he obviously had experimented, but he kept on playing that same Mouthpiece. I'm very similar. I've got an old Giardinelli Mouthpiece, and I've tried many mouthpieces, tried different things, this and that, but I come back to this one. I've been playing it for a long time, and I just can't beat it. It's great. But Bob was incredible, and so that was kind of a little funny story. I tried to change and raised his eyebrow, and he knew that I knew what that meant, so I started laughing. But Bob was incredible. He was very, very nice to me. And I met him several years at different times. He would come to L.A., and I made sure wherever he played in L.A., which is very few, maybe once every couple of years or something, I would always be there. And he always remembered me. We traded a couple of emails, and I was very fortunate to get to know him. The man was an absolute genius, not only his valve trombone playing, but piano playing, arranging, composing. He really was a musical genius and a very bright fellow. But he was very nice to me, and so I was really thrilled. I've got some signed albums and things from him, and that I had him sign for me. And anyway, that was kind of a kick. But his mouthpiece, by the way, the John Coffey was a Boston symphonic player. I think he died in the early '80s. I think a few guys studied with him, and he made some mouthpieces. He was in the Boston Symphony and I also believe the Boston Pops. And John Coffey, Coffey, made a few mouthpieces in different sizes. He was a bass trombone player, I think, primarily, but I think he also played tenor. And he had done a lot of studio work. I guess I never directly heard him play, but I imagine he was a phenomenal trombonist from what everybody said. And he made just a few mouthpieces, had a guy make them for him, and they're impossible to find. But for those who want to check one out, my friend Bob Ramsdell, who co-wrote the last part of the book, the Valve Trombone book, on my website, Bob knew Bob Brookmeyer and became friends with him, went to the jazz camps, and he became friends with him. And he, near the end there, Brookmeyer gave my friend Bob Ramsdell, who's also a fine valve trombonist, his mouthpiece to get copied. Bob had a contact to do a computer copy, what they call CNC, and he did a computer copy, and he's got a few of them. He made a bunch of them, and he sells them. So anybody who wants to check out what Bob Brookmeyer played, the only way that you're going to find a John Coffey mouthpiece, I think, these days would be to get it through Bob Ramsdell. And his website is Valve Trombones Are Us. So it's like the Toys R Us, valvetrombonesrus.com, Bob Ramsdell. And he can actually sell you one. He's got some left. I just talked to him not long ago. So it's a rare mouthpiece. But it certainly worked great for Bob, and he played it all his life. And he died in 2011, and so he probably played that mouthpiece a total of probably about 60 years. So that's kind of a cool thing. But anyway, he tried to change, like a lot of us. So that's a little Bob Brookmeyer story, but he was just an amazing man and incredible talent, and I was very fortunate that I got to meet him and get to know him a little bit. I wish he spent more time in L.A., but I guess he had done that in his early life. He sort of had enough of it. But anyway, so that's a little Brookmeyer story for you guys, and a place where you can find his mouthpiece. So have a good day out there. Keep swinging and keep playing jazz trombone if you're playing. Barry Mosley, valve trombonist, barrymosley.com. Thank you guys, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.